Welcome to Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle. I'm Bobby Owsinski, and this is a show all about music, music production, and the music business. My guest today is producer Ted Hutt. But first, let's talk about something that may turn out to be very significant that just happened this week. Spotify dropped all of the music from indie label Victory Records. Now, you might not know who Victory Records is, and it really doesn't matter at this point. But what happened is a big deal. So essentially what happened was Victory Records felt that it wasn't getting the royalties from publishing from Spotify. So Victory hired Audiam. And Audiam is a monitoring service, a digital monitoring service that actually goes in and does an audit. So what it did is it collected all the records from Spotify and it went back till 2012. And what it found was that Victory actually hadn't been paid on over 50 million streams covering 2,000 plus songs. So Audiam sent an email to Spotify saying, "We think you owe us this amount of money, so pay up." Spotify says, okay, and then reneged. And this happened again. Spotify reneged. It happened a third time, and this time Spotify came back and pulled all of Victory Records' music off of Spotify. Now, sometimes a label will say, well, you're not paying us, so you can't have our songs. But that wasn't the case in this point. Victory was very precise about what they asked. They said, just pay us the money for the publishing. It's fine. You can actually keep the songs going. Now, keep in mind that what's happening this whole time is that Spotify is actually paying, but they're paying on the sound recording. They're not paying part of the publishing. So there's actually money that's being paid to Victory Records, but it's just not all of it. So how does this work? Well, first of all, digital royalties is really complicated. And let me give you a 2-minute overview and you'll see just how complicated it is. First of all, there are two types of streaming services. The first is called non-interactive or webcast. And this is like Pandora. It's basically a radio-like service where you can't select the song that you want to hear. You can select the artist and you can select the genre, but you can't select the song. The second is called an interactive service, and that's like Spotify or Apple Music, where you can specify exactly what you want to hear when you want to hear it. Now, it turns out that interactive services pay a lot more than non-interactive services. Okay, so that's the first thing. Here's the second one. Each of these services generally offer two different tiers. The first one, of course, is a freemium tier, which means the user doesn't pay anything, and it's ad-supported. They're ads that the user is forced to listen to or to watch. Then the second tier is the premium tier, and the user is going to pay like $9.99 a month. Now, what ends up happening is the premium tier pays a lot more to the label, to the artist, to the publisher, than the freemium tier does. Okay, so that's two things. Here's the next thing. There are two different royalties that are generated for each stream. First one is on the sound recording, so who owns the sound recording is going to get that. And this is the biggest amount of all of the streaming royalties. And generally goes to the record label. So this is the recording of the song. Who owns the recording of the song? And the second one is the publishing. And the publishing is generally speaking about 1/10 of, and sometimes even less, of what the sound recording royalty is being paid. And this goes to the publisher, the songwriter, by way of ASCAP or BMI or CSAC. Okay, got it so far? Well, it turns out that an interactive service actually pays 1/3 royalty, and this is called a streaming mechanical royalty. And it pays sort of in the middle of the other two. And this streaming royalty is the source of the problem between Spotify and Victory Records. Spotify was paying everything else. They just weren't paying this particular streaming royalty. So anyway, Spotify comes back and says, wait a second, it's not necessarily our fault. We didn't know who to pay it to. And they actually have a legitimate reason here. Because the way they know who to pay is based on the metadata that's supplied by the record label. So in other words, when the record label uploads a song to Spotify or Apple Music or anybody else, it has to supply this metadata, which basically says, okay, here's the name of the song, the artist, the publisher, the writers, what the splits are, and also the ISRC code, the standard identifier that each song has. If this isn't supplied, even one of those things isn't supplied, then it's possible that the label might not get paid, the artist might not get paid, the publisher might not get paid, or the songwriter might not get paid. Now, it turns out that most labels relegate this job to their interns because it's a manual procedure. It's not automated at all. It's something that you actually have to type in for every song. So it's really laborious. So they get their interns to do this, and interns sometimes are less than competent, and sometimes interns don't care as much, and sometimes they can't find the info, so they'll just upload it without some of this data. So it's legitimate when a streaming service says, oh, we didn't know who to send it to. Now, they probably could have found out, but they're busy with other things, so they feel that it's not their job. If you didn't supply the data to them, then they don't know who to pay, and they're not going to go looking for you. So that's a really big problem in the industry, because it turns out that what might happen is there's a huge amount of money that's sitting out there that no one's getting paid. Many publishers in the business feel that about 25% of the money they're making, which is hundreds of millions of dollars, is actually not being paid because of this problem. So this is just the tip of the iceberg, and you can see how this particular battle between Spotify and Victory really is a big deal. So pay attention to this in the future, because you're going to see more and more of these things occurring. There's also another thing that ADIAM was involved in, and that was Bob Dylan. And it turns out that Bob Dylan wasn't getting paid on 850 different copies of All Along the Watchtower. So it wasn't the versions he did, it's the versions everybody else did. And again, a lot of times the metadata wasn't supplied, so he's not getting paid, or he wasn't getting paid. He might be now. So look out for this. This is a big deal, and it means a lot for everybody's future who's actually going to be supplying their songs to a streaming network. If you have any questions or comments, send them to questions@bobbyownercircle.com. Don't forget about my new coaching program. It's 101 Mixing Tricks, Big Studio Tricks with a Small Studio. Go to 101mixingtricks.com to learn more. Next thing I want to talk about is the frequency bands in a single word. Now, this is something that I posted in my Mixing Engineer's Handbook, and also I posted it on my blog a few times. But it's really something to keep in the back of your mind, because it helps with EQing. And that's basically knowing what the bands sound like just through one word. So for instance, if someone was to say 31 hertz to you, what that means is rumble or chest. It means that you can feel the sound rather than hear it. So if you just remember rumble or chest when you think of 30 hertz, there you go, you got it. The next one up would be 60, and that gives you bottom. So want more bottom? It's 60 or so. Want less? 60 or so. At 120, we get boom or thump or warmth. If there's too much, it's boomy. If there's just the right amount, you get a thump or you get warmth. At 250 hertz, it's fullness, but if you add too much, it gets muddy. So it's either fullness or mud. At 500 hertz, you get honk. I don't know anybody that likes 500 hertz, but if you add too much of it, it sounds honky. At 1K, you get whack. And of course, everybody wants their snare drum to whack. And that's why 1K is so important. So just remember whack at 1K. At 2K, you get crunch. So here we go. Guitars, for instance. You want your guitars to crunch? 2K. You want some edge on a vocal, on an instrument? 4K. 4K is edge. While 8K is either sibilance, if there's too much, or definition, if there's just the right amount, or ouch, if there's way too much. So 8K has sibilance, definition, or ouch. 16K is air. It's another one of those frequencies that you perceive rather than hear. So 16K is air. So if you just think of those frequency bands along with those particular words, that will help you EQing. It will help you see and feel each of those frequencies a lot better. My guest today is Grammy-winning producer Ted Hutt. Ted started his career as a guitar player for the Celtic band Flogging Molly and eventually became their producer. He's since gone on to produce dozens of acts, including Dropkick Murphys, The Bouncing Souls, and Old Crow Medicine Show, among many others. I spoke with Ted via phone from Los Angeles. So I know you're doing pre-production now, so let's start there. Do you have an approach to pre-production?
Yeah, basically get all the ideas out on the table, get everything out in its fullest form, and then just start working through the songs and sort of crafting them and finding interesting arrangements and compositions and, building things where they need to be added to or finished where they need to be finished, or just kind of shaping the album. I think a lot of the work actually for me gets done in that pre-production period. It's kind of like, for me, I feel like you're sort of mixing the record at that, at that point. You're figuring stuff out in the pre-production that will eventually sort of become stuff that's that makes sense when you mix the record at the end of the process.
How much time do you like to have for pre-production?
I usually spend about 10 days, a couple of weeks. It depends. I've done projects also where I've worked on stuff for months. I've done stuff, on like done Skype sessions and things with bands where we work on songs and structures and things at, a couple of hours, a couple of days a week or whatever, while they're putting together songs for an album. So it becomes kind of a long process, and, it will help sort of shape the album that way and sort of help to shape the writing and the composition towards that. And then I'll get together with the band, go into a room, work through stuff, and then I'll go into the studio with them. It varies from project to project. Everything's different. Each one sort of requires a different approach and a different set of ideas.
I know you do a lot of acoustic music and electric music, and they're different, but is your approach different when it comes to pre-production?
Not really, because basically it's about, the biggest part of it for me is initially it's about the songs and the idea for the sound of the album. So I'm still of that mind where I want to make a record which has a vibe about it as a piece, as a body of work in a record. I'm still not really into the idea of sort of just making one-off songs. I like to build an album where you're going to listen to the album and you're going to get into that mood for that hour that you listen to the record for. So whether it's acoustic or electric, you're sort of building on songs, you're making sure that the songs speak, and you're also looking at interesting arrangements and interesting instrumentation. And sort of like working out parts across the spectrum too. So, if you've got a lot of players in a band and they're all working in a similar frequency, you want to open that up and find parts that spread it out. Otherwise, you get a big ball of sound in the middle there, and you want to paint it a little better from top to bottom. And again, that goes back to the mixing, where you come to the end of the record and you hopefully got parts where everything sits nicely in place, rather than sort of having to figure ways to kind of make everything, have its home there.
Yeah, the arrangement means so much when it comes to that. It's very underrated sometimes. People think you can just mix something and it'll work, but it's the arrangement a lot of times.
No, and I think, I was lucky, when I started playing, and I worked with some great producers, and, when I was really young, and I think that really, they really pointed that out to me. It's like, if it's done right, it shouldn't be too difficult to mix it. It becomes a struggle when you haven't got your arrangements good and you haven't got your instruments in frequencies that work. It's that becomes problematic. And I mean, and again, there's no rules with it. It's like some things are great that way. It's like I don't think there's a set way of doing things. Again, it's like each project is its own thing, and I tend to like to find things that sort of spread across the spectrum rather than all sort of bunch up there.
Well, you mentioned before when you first started it, did you have a particular mentor when it comes to production, or somebody that you learned the most from?
Not really. I don't think I consciously thought about it that way. I mean, if I reflect on it, yeah. I mean, I was lucky. When I started out, I worked with, I think the first record I made was with Chris Kimsey, who did Rolling Stones records, and I did a record with Steve Lipson and Steve Brown, who had done Cult records and stuff like that. So, and everybody that I worked with was very patient with me and very very willing to share ideas and thoughts, and I think that's something in hindsight that I look back on and go, that was a great learning experience. I should probably pay more attention when I was in there, but and I think that that sowed the seeds for wanting to do this too. So I liked the idea of being the person in there, sort of conducting and helping people to find the things that they were looking for and sort of make the puzzle work and make all the different elements of a song come together and feel like they're one cohesive thing. I think you wrote a book about mixing, right?
Yeah, I did.
And the first project I ever took on, I probably jumped a little ahead of myself, and I ended up with a record in front of me to mix, not really knowing what I was doing. And I actually got your book and sat there and read your book in order to exercise that mix. And I think at one point before the particular band came in, there was an assistant in the studio who was like, I think you probably want to move that book off the table. But I want to thank you for that. That was a lot of help to me. It gave me a little confidence and a few ideas to get myself started there.
Well, glad to be of some help. That's a good story. Well, okay, let's go there for a second. So do you mix everything that you produce then?
For the most part, not as a rule. I mean, I'm happy for somebody else to mix it, but for the most part, I do. I think it's just, you follow that process right from the writing of the song, the writing and structuring of the songs all the way through to the end, and you have an idea of what you're looking for. And I guess it makes it quite difficult for somebody else to step in and sort of, I think the occasions where I have had somebody else mix, I've still done, pretty defined roughs and handed those over. So the basic thing's kind of there, and then they, add their thing to it. And I'm certainly not opposed to that. It's I kind of enjoy people, anybody that's good at something, it becomes fun to listen to that as a spectator, as an audience member, really. As with, people that play really well, it's really, it's a great feeling to just sort of watch people that are good at doing things do their thing. And I've got no problem with somebody taking something that I've done and adding, a great mix to it.
Yeah, I know. I've had the same experience where I've had other people mix my stuff, and in some cases it'd be so close to the roughs I gave them that it would be like, well, hey, what's the difference? And in other cases, they come up with something that'd be so different. I go, wow, how did you ever think of that? I never would have thought of that.
Yeah. No, I'm totally open to that. And I think, from my experience, the team is always better than the one. I feel like for the most part, we all work better as a team. And we all kind of, I think it's through other people that I sort of find my best moments. And I think, hopefully that works in a cycle too. So when you have somebody who's really good at what they do sort of come in and be part of your project and part of the process with you, then that's nothing but thrilling to see the end result when something takes.
What was it like to produce a band that you were in? Because
Flogging Molly, do you mean?
Yeah. I mean, there must have been some interesting personal dynamics there.
Yeah, I think it was an interesting dynamic, but that was probably one of the first things that I did do as a producer. So, in a way, I guess that was a good stepping stone for me because I wasn't completely alien and I wasn't completely unfamiliar. But in hindsight, now after working on loads of records where, that it was a complete fresh meeting from the start, there was some interesting dynamics there, having been a member of the band and probably an integral member at the early days too. I don't think there was ever issues with sort of, I definitely went into the project as a producer and not as a member of the band. And I think there were sort of meetings before we did it where, that was a clear definition. It was like, I'm now on this side of the fence and not part of the band. And I think that made that sort of more workable. But, interesting one.
Yeah, you exercise your authority in that case. You establish your authority, and I think that's important because sometimes I don't know if you've had this, but I've had when I've worked with the band for like 4 records or something. They know what they want in the studio, and the producer's role is a little more difficult because the band doesn't listen to you as much, at least in my experience. And it happened to George Martin too with the Beatles for that matter. But have you had that?
I know I've been very, very fortunate with that, and I think for the most part, every situation's been I've not really struggled with that. And to be honest, I really do like working with people that do have a definite idea of what they're looking for. And I think that, as a sounding board and as a collaborator on that only makes, in many ways, it makes my job easier because you're working with somebody who has a clear vision of what they want. And then again, you find your place in there to become the soundboard for that. And I think one of the things that's probably very important in doing this is that you don't enter into projects where you don't have a very strong feeling about what you're working with. I've been very careful to be a fan of the artist and also a fan of the body of music that they're drawing from too. So you're both on the same wavelength very much so. So no, I think it's, I think for the most part, the initial days are sort of while you're structuring and building up those song ideas, you're also building up a relationship and you're building up trust between you. And once you've established that, and fortunately that in most cases comes pretty quickly, it becomes like a collaboration and friendship too. I've been very, as I said, I've been very lucky with that, and that one's been I've never really found an issue with it. I think it's like that, the idea that, you're going to inspire somebody's best moments or that they're going to inspire your best moments. It's like you're both working off each other. If you set the whole thing up in the right way and you don't go in there, I think maybe one of the things that's important is that you sort of check the egos.
Yeah.
That has to stay outside of the room and you have to sort of clear the atmosphere for like, this is a creative atmosphere and what we're here to do is explore ideas and be creative. Nothing's precious. Nobody has an ego. And you may have to check that every now and then and make sure that stays on course. But for the most part, once you do that, it becomes really quite fun to work, and very creative.
Yeah. Yeah. What are your budgets like these days? Have you found they've gone up a little bit? I've talked to a lot of other producers, and some have said they're as bad as ever, and others have told me, well, I've gotten a little bit more than I used to. What have you found?
I think it depends. I mean, it's workable with, I know everybody's struggling with the whole sort of record sales, streaming, that whole issue, but fortunately, it's been pretty good. Been done pretty well, or at least again, project to project, each project has been served with enough to be able to get it to the place it needs to be gotten to.
Yeah.
And I think that's also part of it too. Is that using there's records where it's a new band or something that sort of hasn't proved itself yet, and you may be working on a tighter budget, but that also contributes to the sound of the record. You use the limitations to your advantage and you try to figure out ways to do things where, you're making the right record for the place that the artist or the person is in that particular time. So sometimes the tight budget can be your friend. Stops you thinking too much.
Yeah, yeah. Has your deal changed with the budgets? What you're looking for? Because points don't mean so much anymore.
I'm getting that idea. Yeah. Yeah, stuff changes a little bit. We've got to find ways to try to, to make it all make sense for us. But I don't know. I mean, for the most part, nothing's really drastically changed for me. I mean, we still do everything on the same sort of model that we always have done.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you engineer your own tracks?
Not anymore. I used to in the early days, but I don't really come from that place. I come from more of the artist side of things. I was in bands, and I play guitar.
Yeah.
And there's people that are better at it than I am. So I use Ryan Moll works with me a lot. I love working with Ryan. We've done a lot of records together, and there's sort of a synchronicity there. We've done so many things that we sort of know we both know what we're looking for, and he can pull sounds together and get them sounding way better than I can, and know what I'm looking for. So I'll give the basic idea of where we're going and what we're going to do, and then we'll sort of sit and figure out a plan and how we're going to go about it. And then, there's that element. And then the other element is it frees me up sort of, to make sure that I'm spending time with the band and I'm able to give them undivided attention as far as, figuring out performances and structures and continuing that, that process. Because although we'll do a huge part of it in the pre-production, it'll still be evolving all the way through the record. We'll still make changes all the way along until the end. It's not done until it's done.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I've found the same thing where it's usually hugely difficult for me to engineer and produce at the same time. And I don't feel like I can be good at both, So that's why I like to get somebody in to do it, because if the budget permits anyway, but it doesn't always.
Well, if it's something that you have to do, it's something you have to do. But yeah, I mean, again, it's that idea of bringing people in bringing a good team in, like the collection of people that are all really good at what they do is better than, people trying to wear several hats.
Do you have any secrets for keeping people happy in the studio? Loaded question, isn't it?
I don't know. I don't know if there's any secrets to that. Just don't let things get into weird places. Just try to keep everything in perspective. If you're struggling with something and something's not going the way that you'd like it to be going, or you thought it would go, then change direction quickly. So whenever, I think one of the things that I stay away from is like trying to force things. If something's not working out, if that was the way that we thought it would work and it, for whatever reason it isn't, it doesn't seem to be happening, then you quickly get the feeling that, I think you have to use that sense. You get the feeling within yourself, and you get the feeling within other people that you're working with, that if you're not vibing, then and it's not exciting, then either figure out a change or take a different path for a bit, or just drop that and work on something else for a bit.
Yeah.
But I think you got to make sure that the room stays creative.
What do you do if something gets dark? If as band members do, and they have huge disagreements, what's your diplomatic chops like? They must be good.
If it gets dark?
Yeah.
Well, it depends. I mean, if that's suiting what we're doing, then let it be dark for a little bit, or let things play out like that, or I think just sort of like just figure out what's going on and go to the root of it and say what's going on here, and address something before it becomes a situation that's not addressable. And again, it's been very, very rare that I've had situations like that. For the most part, when people come to the studio, they're excited to work, and we're in there, making a record, which is a great privilege for us all, and we all know that. And honestly, my feeling about it too is that if something's not really, if stuff gets dark and it gets weird, then I don't really want to be there.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and I think you can sense those situations before you arrive at them.
What are your sessions like? Are your sessions long?
It depends where you are in the record. you tend to sort of pace yourself. So at the beginning, maybe you keep things shorter and sharper, and then as you get working, it's like the parachute jump. The closer you get to the ground, the more intense it all becomes, and you have to put the hours in. But and we do records, again, sort of multiple ways. Sometimes you have a limited amount of time, and you have to fit the work in, and you sort of end up sort of doing things very spontaneously and quickly, and you do them, over a shorter period of time. And then there are the other ones where you draw it out a little bit, where you may work over a series of months and sort of work for a couple of weeks and then do something else for a bit and back to it. So there really is no absolute way. It's so many different ways. But
okay.
Yeah, they usually turn out to be longer than shorter.
When you do basic tracks, are you going for a track a day or 2 tracks, or how are you doing that?
Again, sort of, I think it tends to be more like I'll start off with because I work predominantly with band situations, so I'll work predominantly sort of setting everything up and being able to track stuff pretty much live. And I'll go usually because I'm looking for the drums and the bottom end of stuff to build on if I don't indeed capture everything, live on the floor, which we have done on certain records too. But, it depends. Maybe 2 or 3 songs a day, something like that. If you really push, maybe 4 or 5 songs a day. I usually allocate, like the first week of the tracking time to sort of the foundations, to making sure that we got our basic outlines of drums, and then we can build upon that. And I tend to sort of work in a way where if we have, flexible ideas and parts, then I'll record the longest versions of things, and we'll build on those. And as we go along, and as we go through the tracking, I'll tend to sort of cut things back and edit down.
Oh, so you're editing as you go then?
I will do, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, as I said, it's a process all the way through. It's not, I definitely don't get to the point where I track it and there it is. And it's definitely, everything will be an evolution, even parts, lyrics, all of it as we go along.
Are you tracking the entire band at the same time?
I have done, yes. And for the most part, we'll try and set up that way. Again, it's sort of, it's budget dependent, but if you've got a situation where you can get everything up and you can get it all, sounding great, then take everything together and then figure out what can be kept and on what you need to, where you want to go from that point. But we like the idea of sort of at least starting out with a room full of people all playing together. And I think that sort of goes back to the core again of what it's about. I come from that place of like, I want to make records where it's fun to go in and sort of bounce off a room full of people, where you got your, the idea of music bringing people together and having that experience and having that, swapping of ideas and collaboration and the chemistry of the creativity of that. So yes, we'll definitely work that and take stuff together.
Do you have any techniques for getting the best performance out of a player?
Each person's different. Yeah, I think, it's funny how intuitive that is. You just get to know somebody and you just figure out what makes them do what they do the best, and you do that to them. Sometimes it's encouragement, and sometimes it's just, there are various ways to sort of accomplish that. But yeah, I think that definitely is part of the process. It's about, once you've got those songs, the structures, and you've got everything you're laying on there, you want to push somebody for their very best performance. You're looking for the elements of that person which are unique to them in the thing that they do best, and you're trying to pull out that and sort of step them away from the thing that in my opinion, maybe they don't do as well. Just push them in the good direction. And it's surprising what people will do. Sometimes, because of the way things come together and songs come together, sometimes you got, people that they're maybe not in the best key to sing, and maybe they're not in the best tuning for the guitar, or sorts of things like that can be helped at least at the starting point, and then sounds, and then ideas for how you want things to sound, and feeding that to somebody, and building up the enthusiasm of that particular player, within that spectrum of sounds and their environment, and having them hear back things, and then presenting maybe options for trying things different ways, and just building that relationship.
When you do vocals, are you doing multiple takes and then comping them together? Are you trying to get one take by doing punching, or how does that work for you?
I do multiple takes, and then what I tend to do is I find that when you're sort of working with vocals, you tend to get to the point where everything builds up, the sort of intensity and the energy builds up to a point where for me anyway, I've noticed you'll get 2 or 3 takes in a row which are really firing, and then I'll tend to go to those takes and try to work within, keeping the most of one take, but obviously jump between takes to comp. So you're getting you're getting a spontaneous performance, but you're getting the best of that.
Yeah, right.
And then sometimes also, sometimes what I'll do also is, there may be changes that happen. So we'll do that, and then we'll go away, make changes, we'll come back and re-sing too, and I think once you've done a comp, you're able to sit there and look at what you got and go, well, this is where we are at this point. I think there's more to be had. So let's go at it again. Let's try something, with a different angle, or, try a different approach on it. And I've very often done that. And in most cases, each time you do it, your intuition is telling you that better. You have, there are records that I've done several albums with bands. So in that way, I get to know the artist, and I know what they're capable of, and I'm looking to try to get the best that I can.
Yeah, I've always felt that it takes 2 days to do an overdub, where the first day you kind of figure it out, and the second day you perform it. You perform it well.
Yeah.
Because
there is. I mean, there is an evolution of things. And you don't always have the luxury to do that with everything. But vocals. So
yeah.
If anything's going to be afforded that, then it has to be. The vocal.
Okay, last question. What's the best piece of music business advice that someone imparted to you or you learned along the way?
Don't stress.
Easier said than done, Ted.
It'll always be all right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's the killer. When you see people, when that happens, I think, going back to one of your earlier questions, I think maybe, that's part of staying away from that place where things get weird, because you just you address that and you make sure that you do everything you can not to let anybody panic or stress. And because it stays open that way, the creativity gets closed down really quickly when you start getting stressed over it.
Yeah, you're right.
It's stress until you get home.
It's really easy to go to that place, that's for sure. But
yeah.
Yeah. And it just goes to show you how much of that part of the business has to do with more than just musical ability or knowledge or engineering or any of that stuff, where so much of it is psychological.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's a big part of it. Well, it's in many ways, it's kind of a microcosm of life in full. It's been an interesting idea of mine at some point to sort of, you can make that comparison in its tiny, tiny way, that everything that goes on in the studio between the different elements is is a microcosm of what goes on in the world.
Yeah.
And you're dealing, as you say, it takes a lot of psychology and a lot of, it's figuring solutions to things. Going back to the idea that if something doesn't work, there's a reason why it's not working. Change directions rather than bang your head against the wall until everybody's done.
Yeah.
You cue off of the things that are. You don't see anything as a negative. So if something's not working, that's a positive cue to change course.
Good advice. This has been great, Ted. Thanks so much.
There's another one. You're very welcome. I should probably jump back in there now. It's gone a bit quiet, but you're very welcome, and hope that'll work. Brilliant, and thanks again for writing the book. It was a big help for me, and that record actually went gold. So there you go.
Which record was it?
I can't tell you.
Okay, that's all right. Just knowing that I helped you is enough.
It was the first Flogging Molly record that I mixed.
No kidding.
There you go. I did tell you.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, Ted.
I'll speak to you later.
Take care.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
You can find out more about Ted on his Wikipedia page. Just do a search for Ted Hutt. That's Hutt, Ted Hutt. Thanks for listening and being in my inner circle. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, send them to questions@BobbyOInnerCircle.com. Many, many thanks to Steve Cherubino. He's the host of the EDM Producer Podcast at edmmr.com. Steve helps put the show together. Thank you kindly, Steve. To listen to other episodes of Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle, go to BobbyOwsinski.com and select the podcast tab. Or you can go to BobbyOInnerCircle.com or find it on iTunes or Stitcher or brand new Mixcloud. At BobbyOwsinski.com and BobbyOInnerCircle.com, you'll also find a sign-up form for my newsletter and for alerts for new podcasts. This is Bobby Owsinski. I'll see you next time.